The courtroom was steeped in silence. The jury members held their breath, their eyes fixed on the prosecution and defense. The accused, 25-year-old David Carter, sat frozen at the defendant's table, his mind clouded with disbelief. The crime he was accused of was beyond his comprehension. His eyes flickered to the polished wooden surface of the table before him. He remembered that night, but the evidence was damning. The prosecutor took a step forward, shooting a sharp glance at David before turning to address the jury.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we have multiple eyewitnesses placing the defendant at the crime scene on the night of the murder. Furthermore, the murder weapon carries his fingerprints. This case is straightforward. The defendant is guilty, and justice must be served.
The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. A wave of unease swept over David as he shook his head. He was innocent, but no one believed him. And then, out of nowhere, Dr. Mark Reynolds rose to his feet. He was a well-respected surgeon, one of the most esteemed in the city. His unexpected action sent ripples of shock through the room.
Your Honor, I would like to testify, because this young man is innocent.
A hush fell over the courtroom. Why was a doctor, one of the most revered in the field, speaking in defense of an accused murderer? Judge Patterson furrowed his brows before giving a measured nod.
Proceed, Dr. Reynolds. We are very interested in hearing what you have to say.
The doctor strode confidently to the witness stand, his voice steady as he addressed the court.
On the night of the alleged murder, at exactly 11 p.m., David Carter was with me. A medical emergency required my presence at the hospital, and I can confirm that David was there at the same time. The hospital records will support this.
A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. Prosecutor Brandon arched an eyebrow, folding his arms as if weighing the doctor's claim.
Are you telling us, Dr. Reynolds, that the accused, who was caught at the crime scene with the victim's blood on his hands, was instead at the hospital with you?
That's exactly what I'm saying. And I will not stand by and watch an innocent man's life be destroyed.
The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. Some looked at Dr. Reynolds with admiration, others with doubt. A hero had stepped forward, or had he? Defense attorney Laura Williams watched Dr. Reynolds carefully from across the room. He had spoken with unwavering confidence, claiming to have been with David at the time of the crime. But something felt off. The way his voice wavered, just slightly. The subtle shift in his posture. The way he had avoided looking directly at David when he spoke.
Something isn't right. If David was truly at the hospital that night, why does Reynolds sound rehearsed?
As soon as court was adjourned, Laura wasted no time. She drove straight to St. Vincent Hospital, her gut screaming that she needed to verify the doctor's claims. At the reception desk, she leaned over, her voice firm.
I need to confirm a hospital record. Was a patient named David Carter registered here on Tuesday night between 10 p.m. and midnight?
The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, tapped away at the keyboard before glancing up with a disinterested shrug.
Let's see. Nope, there's no record of a David Carter being admitted that night.
Laura's pulse quickened.
He lied. Dr. Reynolds lied, but why?
Fighting to keep her composure, she knew there was one more thing she had to check. She filed a formal request, and after a few painstaking days, the hospital finally granted her access to the footage from that night. Sitting in a dimly lit records room, Laura fast-forwarded through the grainy security footage, her heart pounding. 10 p.m. Nothing. 10:30 p.m. No sign of David or Dr. Reynolds. 11 p.m. The crucial moment. Her fingers hovered over the pause button, eyes scanning the screen.
All right, doctor. Let's see if you were really here.
The seconds ticked by. The timestamp read 11 p.m., but Dr. Reynolds was nowhere to be seen. Laura leaned in, narrowing her eyes. She fast-forwarded. 11:15 p.m., 11:30 p.m. Still nothing. Then, at 11:50 p.m., something caught her eye. Dr. Reynolds finally appeared, but something was wrong. He wasn't entering the hospital in a calm, composed manner. He was rushing in. His head was down, his face partially hidden, and his hands were covered in blood. Laura's breath caught in her throat.
What the hell?
The doctor hadn't been there at 11 p.m., as he had claimed. He had arrived 50 minutes later, with blood on his hands. Her grip tightened on the desk.
If he wasn't at the hospital, then where the hell was he?
A horrible realization crept over her. The doctor's alibi was a lie, and the blood on his hands might just belong to the real victim. Her jaw clenched, anger burning in her chest. She slammed her fist on the desk.
We have a problem, doctor, and I have some damn questions for you.
The courtroom battle was far from over. The real story was only beginning. Laura knew something was off about Dr. Mark Reynolds, but when she dug deeper, she found something far worse than she had imagined. She combed through hospital records, financial transactions, and confidential reports, only to stumble upon a shocking truth. Dr. Reynolds' name appeared in multiple illegal organ trafficking investigations, And then, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. The autopsy report of the murder victim, Adam Price, revealed something horrifying. His internal organs were missing. Laura's hands trembled as she gripped the report. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. This wasn't just a murder case. Dr. Reynolds wasn't just a witness. He was part of something much, much bigger.
This man, he's not just a doctor, he's a monster.
The following morning, the courtroom was more packed than usual. Journalists, legal experts, and the public filled the benches. Laura strode in confidently, holding a thick folder filled with damning evidence. From across the room, she caught Dr. Reynolds's gaze. For the first time, he looked uneasy. He knew something was coming, but he had no idea when the bomb would drop. Laura walked straight to the judge's bench and cleared her throat.
Your Honor, I no longer believe that Dr. Reynolds was simply trying to protect an innocent man. In fact, I believe he was protecting himself.
A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. Then whispers. Dr. Reynolds's eyes darkened. His hands curled into fists under the table. And then, suddenly, he shot up from his seat.
This is ridiculous. I am a doctor. I save lives. What right do you have to accuse me?
Well, let's take a look at the facts, shall we?
She unfolded a piece of paper and held it up. It was the autopsy report.
According to this report, the murder victim, Adam Price, was found with missing organs. His stomach, kidneys, and even his liver had been removed. Now tell me, Dr. Reynolds, who would do such a thing?
The courtroom exploded in chaos. Gasps echoed through the halls. Journalists scrambled for their notepads. And for the first time, Dr. Reynolds paled.
This is a misunderstanding. I have nothing to do with this.
Laura smirked slightly, never breaking eye contact.
Is that so? Because according to hospital records, the donors for some of your past transplants have mysteriously disappeared.
The courtroom in shock. The murmurs in the courtroom grew into a full-blown commotion. Dr. Reynolds swallowed hard. A bead of sweat trickled down his forehead. Judge Patterson slammed his gavel.
Order in the court. Mr. Williams, do you have further evidence to support your claim?
Laura flipped through her folder, retrieving several documents. She stepped forward, placing them on the judge's desk.
Your Honor, these records show a disturbing pattern. Patients who were scheduled for transplants under Dr. Reynolds's care have gone missing, only for their organs to turn up in surgeries days later.
The judge picked up the papers. His eyebrows knitted together as he scanned the pages. And then, the final blow. Laura reached for another document and held it up. It was a signature, Dr. Reynolds's signature, on every single illegal transplant approval. The air grew thick with tension.
Your Honor, I present to you undeniable proof that Dr. Mark Reynolds is not just a witness in this case. He is a criminal.
Silence. Not a single whisper. Dr. Reynolds froze. His lips parted, but no words came out. His gaze flickered to the exits, as if contemplating running. Judge Patterson set the documents down and turned to the doctor.
Dr. Reynolds, you are being given the opportunity to respond. What do you have to say for yourself?
Dr. Reynolds licked his lips. His face was slick with sweat.
I am just a doctor. I help people. This has nothing to do with me.
Laura leaned in slightly, her expression amused.
Oh? Then perhaps you'd like to explain why your signature is on every single one of these documents?
For a moment, Dr. Reynolds didn't move. Then, his eyes darted around the courtroom, like a cornered animal. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. Everyone watched in eerie silence. And then, finally, his shoulders slumped, his hands clenched into fists, and he knew he had nowhere left to run. The truth had caught up with him, and Laura was ready to deliver the final strike. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating. All eyes were on Laura Williams as she stood at the center, gripping a piece of paper, the DNA test results. She took a slow, deliberate breath before speaking.
Your Honor, the victim fought back before he was killed. Under his fingernails, traces of DNA were found.
She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Dr. Reynolds sat motionless, his hands clenched tightly together.
And that DNA belongs to Dr. Mark Reynolds.
A gasp rippled through the courtroom. A reporter's pen clattered to the floor. Whispers erupted as spectators turned to one another in disbelief. Dr. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his jaw tensed. He averted his gaze, as though looking for an escape.
The victim fought his attacker, and the evidence shows that attacker was you, Dr. Reynolds. Would you like to explain?
Silence. Dr. Reynolds's forehead glistened with sweat. He swallowed hard, but no words came out. His hands trembled. For the first time, he looked afraid. He was caught, and this time, there was no way out. The verdict was clear. Dr. Mark Reynolds had lied, manipulated, and murdered. But now, justice had caught up with him. Prosecutor Brandon stood up slowly, his gaze locked onto the disgraced doctor.
Dr. Mark Reynolds, You have been found guilty of murder.
A deafening roar erupted from the courtroom. Gasps, murmurs, the rapid clicking of cameras. Dr. Reynolds's face went pale, his hands clenched into fists before he buried his face in them. His career, his secrets, his life, all crumbling around him. Judge Patterson slammed his gavel, commanding order.
The court finds Mark Reynolds guilty of first-degree murder and sentences him to life in prison.
Dr. Reynolds closed his eyes. It was over. The guards moved in, placing cold steel handcuffs around his wrists. His once pristine white coat was long gone, his reputation forever shattered. Meanwhile, in the front row, David Carter took a deep, shaky breath. He was free. But the truth left a bitter taste. The man who had fought to save him was the real murderer all along. As the gavel slammed for the final time, one thought echoed in the minds of everyone present. Justice was served, but at what cost?